This maniac is still considered one of the most terrifying serial killers in America. On Thursday, July 27, 2006, a sensation shook the annals of criminal history in the United States. The American justice system officially recognized the sworn testimony of an inmate who had been serving a sentence for the assault and murder of a 13-year-old girl. This recognition confirmed that Robert Browne was, in fact, the most prolific serial killer in modern American history. 49 victims. This man surpassed the grim records of previous infamous killers. Gary Ridgway with 48 murders, John Wayne Gacy with 33, and Juan Corona with 25. Today, I will tell you about the horrifying deeds of this maniac, who officially demanded to be acknowledged as America's most effective killer. Until recently, the story of Robert Browne seemed well known to the public. There was nothing particularly mysterious about it. Browne was serving time in the high-security Cannon City prison in Colorado for his first, and supposedly only, murder, committed in 1991. And that seemed to be the end of the story. Back in 1991, Browne, who was traveling across America in his car, broke into the home of the Church family in the small town of Black Forest, Colorado. Initially planning only to steal valuables and money, he unexpectedly encountered 13-year-old Heather Dawn Church, who was babysitting her 7-month-old brother while her parents were away. Browne quickly changed his plans. Threatening the girl with a knife, he forced her into his car, drove her to a remote rural area, assaulted her, and strangled her with a leather cord he used to carry a military amulet. He then dismembered her body with a parachutist knife and scattered the remains across the area. Unfortunately, the police didn't catch the perpetrator immediately. When officers arrived at the Church home in response to the parents' desperate call, they found only the crying baby. The only clues were fingerprints left by an unknown individual on the windows and doors during the break-in. 2 years later, some of Heather's remains were accidentally discovered. Finally, in 1995, Browne came under suspicion. While conducting a routine traffic stop, police detained the driver of a stolen car and fingerprinted him. The prints matched those found at the Church residence 4 years earlier. Robert Browne, the car thief, didn't deny it. He confessed to murdering the girl and was promptly sentenced to life imprisonment in a maximum security facility. For years, that was all the average true crime enthusiast knew about Browne. They likely didn't know the most intriguing part of the story. And here it is. Until late July 2006, a secret investigation into Browne's case was ongoing. The investigation confirmed that he was a multiple murderer, a record-setting serial killer whose first crime occurred as far back as 1970 in South Korea. The circumstances of this investigation were nothing short of sensational. In early 2000, Robert Browne unexpectedly and for no apparent reason sent a letter to state prosecutors. He titled it Mysterious Poetic Prose. In this letter, the maniac, imitating the style of Nostradamus, wrote, "Your number is 1, but the knowledgeable will see 49. 17 innocent young girls lie buried nearby, but worse ones will be harder to find. Board the White Iron Trans-America Express train. At the end of its journey, the circle of the investigation will close, like a snake biting its tail." Initially, Browne's poetic revelations didn't attract much attention. Only a retired FBI and CIA agent, 79-year-old Charlie Hess, showed interest. Famous for solving numerous mysterious murders in the U.S., Hess began corresponding with Nostradamus. It seems Browne, who enjoyed the attention of the veteran detective, appreciated the gesture. Over the next 6 years, until 2006, he continued to share details of previously unknown murders with Hess. The turning point came when Browne included a hand-drawn map in one of his letters. On this map of death, he marked the locations of his victims' burial sites with 49 crude red crosses. 1 cross in Washington, 2 each in Oklahoma, California, and New Mexico, 3 in Mississippi, 9 in Colorado, 7 in Texas, 5 in Arkansas, and 17 in Louisiana, Browne's home state. Do you recall the 17 innocent girls mentioned earlier? There was even 1 cross outside the map's main boundaries, marked as South Korea. At this point, active detectives took notice of Browne's claims. Interrogations became official, but the killer had conditions. He would only talk on the record if he could determine his own sentence, and there would be no death penalty. Considering the significance of Browne's confessions, the authorities agreed to a compromise. Fast forwarding slightly, it's worth noting that although the trial was lengthy and investigators still needed to confirm details of a murder committed by Browne in South Korea 36 years prior, his fate was already sealed. Judge for yourself whether to laugh or cry, as the relatives of the monster's victims must do, considering that he, by his own words, now faces not 1 but 2 life sentences. Moreover, he is entitled to appeal the sentence in 40 years, by which time Browne, being an optimist, will be 93 years old. All the testimonies provided by the maniac, except for the Korean episode, have been officially recognized as documented and authentic. Today, Robert Browne is lawfully considered the most prolific killer in modern American history. However, law enforcement chose to withhold the motives for the crimes and their circumstances from the public. Here's an intriguing fact about the monster's biography. Little Robbie was born as the 9th and youngest son in a family where his father served as a sheriff in Coushatta, Louisiana. One of Robbie's brothers was a police special forces officer. The most astonishing detail? In 1980, Robbie's father investigated an unsolved case of a brutally murdered and dismembered 16-year-old girl from Coushatta, without ever suspecting that the perpetrator was his own son. As for Robert's personal biography, it is remarkable in its own way. In 1970, expelled from high school for substance abuse, the future maniac enlisted as a medic in the 17th U.S. Army, stationed in South Korea. It was there, during an argument over a minor-aged Asian girl in a bar, that Robbie committed his first murder. That incident, which caused a stir in Korea in the 1970s, was only re-examined decades later. Back then, Robert managed to evade scrutiny from both Korean police and the U.S. military's internal security. He was discharged and returned home without issue. Browne returned to Louisiana not only with his first murder under his belt but also with considerable knowledge of human anatomy. During his Korean days, the future killer reportedly trained with surgeons, a skill believed to have later helped him dismember victims with the precision of a professional. Alongside his initial taste for blood and surgical skills, Browne also brought back a dangerous obsession with young girls, which shaped the trajectory of his life. Louisiana laws at the time were lenient toward marriages with minors, a loophole Browne exploited. At 27, he married his first bride, a 13-year-old girl, in 1980. Over the next 2 years, he married and divorced 6 young girls of similar ages. According to Browne, his young wives were all flawed. Rather than remain faithful, they invariably began seeing other men shortly after the weddings. After his 6th marriage, Browne claimed to have lost all respect for women. Possibly seeking revenge for his wounded ego, he began placing ads in newspapers to find a submissive partner willing to live as his property. But here, too, Browne faced disappointment. Though he found women willing to fulfill such roles, none were interested in his persistent and bizarre request to allow him to blind them with scissors and then, as blind women, submit to him. Evidently, Browne's mind had unraveled further after Korea and his failed marriages. Frustrated by the lack of a compliant, blind wife to fulfill his twisted fantasies, he decided to take by force what he could not obtain willingly. By 1984, Robert Browne had become what is referred to as a roaming killer. His murderous spree of 17 young women in Louisiana, all resembling his ex-wives in age, height, weight, and physical traits, was no longer enough. He began traveling across states, stopping in random towns to kill and taking temporary jobs to blend in. Browne's style, as he proudly described it to investigators, was marked by creative variety. While sexual violence remained a constant in his crimes, the methods he used to kill his victims were disturbingly diverse. Most often, he strangled them with a leather cord, likely inspired by his contempt for his unfaithful ex-wives. To illustrate his depravity, here are some details of specific crimes. Take the case of 16-year-old Rocio Sperry in Louisiana. Browne, working as a key maker, created a duplicate key for her husband Joseph while secretly making a copy for himself. Calculating Joseph's work schedule, Browne entered the house when the husband was away, assaulting Rocio in the presence of her 2-year-old daughter, Emmy. After dragging the girl to the bathroom for another round of abuse, Browne strangled Rocio and disposed of her body nearby, leaving little Emmy sobbing in despair. For years, Joseph Sperry remained the prime suspect in his wife's murder, with even Emmy, now grown, convinced of her father's guilt. Only Browne's confession cleared Joseph's name. Another case showcases the danger of impulsive decisions. In 1984, 19-year-old Melody Bush stopped at the Flatonia Motel on the highway between San Antonio and Houston with her elderly husband. Following an argument over their lackluster intimacy, Melody went down to the bar in search of a more passionate suitor. Enter Robert Browne, taking a break between murders at the same motel. Melody's attempt to find excitement ended tragically. Inviting her to his room, Browne found himself unable to resist the fish that swam straight into the net, as he later described it. He ordered champagne, which was served to the lovers along with a fateful ice pick. Browne sedated the already intoxicated Mrs. Bush with ether, which he always carried. Once she was immobilized, he violated her and then delivered a fatal stab wound to her heart. Leaving the motel undisturbed, Browne disposed of Melody's remains along a highway. In America, neither the former Secret Service agent Hess nor the investigators handling Browne's case could comprehend why the monster confessed to his crimes. Browne himself, who claimed that none of the women he targeted ever survived, asserting that once he acted, no one escaped, offered his reasoning. "I just wanted to get the courts to officially recognize my status as America's most badass killer." If that was truly his motive, then Browne was simply foolish. As an experienced convict, he should have known that in various U.S. prisons, many serial killers and rapists have met their end at the hands of inmates with a code. Furthermore, Browne made another critical mistake, one that normal people found quite satisfying. After bargaining with law enforcement for the right to choose his sentence and effectively achieving formal recognition of his record, Browne neglected to inquire about the location of his future confinement. Judges worldwide, when unable to execute a criminal outright, are not inclined to forgive such oversights. On the contrary, they often exploit these mistakes to ensure that life for the criminal is anything but sweet. Browne, who was housed in a relatively comfortable cell by prison standards, was sentenced to spend the rest of his life in the Colorado State Penitentiary, a maximum security facility. In a country that prides itself on humanity, even a monster like Browne must be guaranteed protection from those very inmates with a code who vowed to put the scum in his place. To ensure his safety, Browne is confined in what Americans call the Tomb Fortress. What is this prison like? Judge for yourself. Until the age of 93, when Browne will first be eligible to challenge the sentence he himself chose, he will live in solitary confinement in a cell measuring 2 by 3 meters. For 23 hours a day, he remains confined there, with 1 hour allocated for showering, under the watch of 2 guards. Every day, for no less than 6 hours, Browne is subjected to a relentless television broadcast of coded lessons on so-called anger management. In short, his life is not one of existence but of perpetual torment. It is precisely because Americans know where this murderer is being rehabilitated that they have refrained from protesting and demanding his execution. Browne's future is horrifying, as it should be for a depraved killer who calls himself America's most badass murderer.